I also want to talk about the development this week with the extraordinary finding of contempt by the House of Representatives against Mark Meadows, the former chief of staff to President Trump. Now, Meadows had cooperated somewhat with the January 6th Rump Committee. I call it the Rump Committee because it's not a real committee. It's a committee of one party. Yes, there are two Republicans on it, but they don't answer to the Republicans. They don't represent the minority party. They're representatives of the majority party, the Democrats in the House. So it's this one committee, one party committee, a Rump Committee that is using January 6th. And I'm really interested in January 6th per se. It's pretty clear what happened there. A lack of security led to a breakdown in security and violence. And will they investigate the U.S. Capitol Police's bungling of the security, or Pelosi's role, or anyone else's role, at least in the House and the Senate, for overseeing security and the security failures that led to the rioting? Because riots happen because of political decisions in terms of policing. That's usually the case. Riots aren't organic in the sense that they're unstoppable by law enforcement. They happen because law enforcement fails, and they usually fail because they're told to fail or told not to do certain things by the politicians running law enforcement. So that being said, you have the January 6th being used as a pretext to target all opposition to the Democratic left in this country. You have Mark Meadows being investigated. Steve Bannon was held in contempt. And they're both making the argument, and Meadows has gone to court to make the argument, that what they're seeking is material that is likely privileged, that the investigation is abusive and violates the rules of the House. I mean, the House has to answer to the rule of law too, believe it or not. So in the case of Meadows, he's in federal court challenging this subpoena, and which is his right as a U.S. citizen. He's held in contempt in the middle of a court challenge by the House. How does that not show you the political nature of what's going on here? And I can tell you that they've expanded the abuse of power to include, potentially 100 people at least, in terms of subpoenas for the phone and text records and email records of all sorts of people whose only crime was to engage in First Amendment protected speech. See, they're not focused on someone who hit a police officer on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol. No, they're focused on people who participated in the rally beforehand, which was completely protected by the First Amendment, people objecting to the way the elections were being handled by the states and then by Congress. You have a right to petition your government. You have a right to freedom of speech. And they're targeting people for that. And they're even going back before then for months over issues related to election integrity. If you were involved in litigation, trying to, in the views of those promoting the litigation, to uphold the rule of law when it comes to elections, they're targeting you for doing that. So this is in retaliation for First Amendment protected speech. And I highlighted before how Congress Judicial Watch had, because we went to court to try to get the subpoenas, how Adam Schiff during the first impeachment of Trump took the phone records of Rudy Giuliani, secret subpoena, Giuliani didn't know about it. They got his phone records and published them. And they included the phone records in publishing them of a member of Congress, Devin Nunes, journalists and lawyers for Trump, other lawyers for Trump. So surprise, surprise, they expand the abuse to include individuals engaged in First Amendment protected speech and their families. You know how phone system, where you get a cell phone, you go to family plan, right? So they get everyone's family members involved. Some of these young staffers, it means their parents get dragged into this. then they're not investigating anything in terms of legislation. They're just messing around with Trump world in order to keep him back on his heels, and people who are supportive of him, back on their heels in a run up to 2022 and 2024. This is political opposition research, it looks like. And on top of that, they're trying to jail people who object to this process. Bannon's being prosecuted by the hacks at the Justice Department. I don't know what they're going to do with Meadows. I wouldn't be surprised if they pulled this again and did another indictment. Others are being forced because of the outrageous conduct of these members of the committee to invoke the Fifth Amendment. They're just trying to come up with something to put someone in jail. Not because they've done anything that's prosecutable under any fair reading of the law. It's politics. These are terrible times for our Republican form of government. We have a Congress that is completely out of control. Brutish in its attack on the rule of law, the Constitution, and the civil liberties of innocent American citizens. Meanwhile, and I want to bring you up to date because I want to go over it with you again, Judicial Watch is actually doing real investigations of January 6th. Judicial Watch exposed, through FOIAs and litigation, for instance, that the federal police, U.S. Park Police, they knew there'd be a big crowd at the Capitol. Obviously, no preparations were made by the Capitol Police or anyone else. Judicial Watch uncovered that Ashli Babbitt was senselessly killed by the U.S. Capitol Police Lieutenant Byrd. There was no good reason. She wasn't armed. We have video showing how dangerous that situation was. He just fired, and there were all sorts of police and others behind her. It's crazy. Judicial Watch uncovered that. Judicial Watch forced the D.C. Office of Medical Examiner through litigation because we wanted to know, where is this autopsy report of Officer Brian Sicknick, who the lying left was saying was killed by rioters, when in fact they knew early on, including in the medical examiner's office, he died of natural causes the next day. And yet they withheld that. And it was only after Judicial Watch sued that they get the information out to us, or to the public generally. So this is the basic investigative work that you would think Congress would be doing if they were serious about this, but they're not. Because Congress is implicated, for instance, in the death of Ashli Babbitt. It was their police force that did it. A needless killing. Where's the investigation into the U.S. Capitol Police about its handling of the January 6th issue? Well, they're not going to do that because who runs the police department in the U.S. Capitol? Nancy Pelosi. Yeah, I know literally she's not running day-to-day operations, but she's the political official who runs the show there. She's Queen of the Hill in that regard. Where are all the videos from January 6th? 14,000 hours of videos we're led to believe. We sued for those records. And Nancy Pelosi's Congress is going to court, telling a court we can't have 1 second of videos under the law. There's a common law right of access to information about the government and to public records. And Nancy Pelosi's police department, the U.S. Capitol Police, have come in and told the court that these aren't, quote, public records. And even if they were, the public interest doesn't require their release. So that 1 second of January 6th videos are being released by Nancy Pelosi, even as she's trying to put people she doesn't like in jail for not cooperating with her rump committee. We also have a lawsuit pending about Nancy Pelosi's communications with General Milley about Donald Trump. Seditious activity, in my view. Try to undermine the chain of command in a way that is very dangerous to a separation of powers and the presidency and the way our military is run. Dangerous times. Judicial Watch is in federal court for records about that. I'm sure there are a few that I'm missing. Of course, we have other FOIAs and records requests. I know we've asked the Capitol Police for records about the shooting of Ashli Babbitt. They haven't given us any records yet. We may have to sue them again. So that's a 1-6 investigation. So this rump committee is harassing people they don't like politically, while Judicial Watch is doing a serious independent investigation that citizens can rely upon, because it's not just me saying, oh, this is what I think about January 6th. No, what we do is we bring out the documents so people can judge for themselves. You can look at the videos. You can look at the audio. You can look at the emails, the text messages, the memos. That's why they hate Judicial Watch, because they can't really argue with the government documents, because there's truth there, and they hate the truth. The left does. And corrupt government officials do, because, to be clear, this is a Republican and Democratic problem. So, January 6th committee is a threat to our constitutional order. It's an abuse of power. And I don't care if there are Republicans on the committee or Democrats on the committee. When you start taking text messages and start reading them into the record, violating the privacy of individuals, when you start harassing people with subpoenas in retaliation for First Amendment protected speech, remember, they don't want us to criticize the election in 2020. And they're trying to criminalize that. I've been warning you about that since January 6th, even before then. And sure enough, that's what they're doing. If you have a question about the election, you should be subject to investigation. That's third world. But unfortunately, it's America right now. And Judicial Watch is standing fast in terms of figuring out what's going on with January 6th. And believe you me, we're monitoring what Congress is doing very closely as well, and may take additional action there.
We got a lot going on here at Judicial Watch. The other crisis, and there are numerous crises, I don't think COVID is the crisis it's being made out to be, but the border is a crisis. Well over 200,000 illegal aliens get across the border every month, practically speaking, under the Biden administration. You just let them in. Those are the numbers. They're called apprehensions, and that translates means into these are the folks that the Border Patrol has seen and administratively handled, but are released into the interior. Our border's wide open. I don't know about you, but if that's not impeachable, I don't know what is. We had leadership in Congress. They'd be talking about impeaching President Biden for failing to execute his oath of office, by failing to make sure that the laws are faithfully executed. Mayorkas, who is the head of the Department of Homeland Security, impeach him. Kamala Harris, she's endorsed it. Impeach her. I'm dead serious about this. 250,000 people a year, a month at least. I mean, they're talking 2 million this year who will get across the border. Get across the border because Biden refuses to enforce our border. Secure it in the most basic way. And he's affecting and helping this human trafficking. Let me be clear again. The Biden administration is part of the most significant human trafficking operation in world history. They are helping the human traffickers get the people across the border. They check to make sure they're there, that they have some information on them, and that's being charitable, and then they let them pass. Sometimes flying them to places within the country, using the military and other means. Again, if that's not impeachable, what is? And it goes, and the handling of the border goes to show you they don't care about anything they say they care about. They say they're concerned about the COVID and the spread of the Delta variant. You know what's going on at the border. Everyone crosses. No one's checked, by the government at least. McAllen, Texas is complaining, according to Fox News, it's 7,000 COVID positive illegal immigrants released to their town. Just 1,700 since February, 1,700 in just the last month. They don't care about COVID. If they did, they would stop it. They'd secure the border. They'd stop literally importing COVID. And besides, they have a positive moral obligation and constitutional obligation to secure the border against illegal crossers, and they're not doing it. They're refusing to do it. So the Trump administration had in some ways successfully controlled the most recent wave by creating what is known as the Remain in Mexico program, the Migrant Protection Protocols, that if someone was going to seek asylum, usually fraudulently, which is what the problem is, they come in, they say they're seeking asylum, and they just let them into the country, knowing that it was likely to be either rejected or they never show up to follow up. So they said you have to remain in Mexico to pursue your asylum claim. And that obviously severely curtailed fraudulent claims and the likelihood that illegal aliens would get in by cheating as a result. So what did Biden do? He ended it. And not only that, he encouraged people who were in the program, who were still in Mexico, just to come on in. They began processing them almost immediately. At least 25,000 people. And so what we want to know is what about any crimes associated with these folks who've come in? And we wanted to know if the Biden administration was keeping track of it. So, of course, we weren't getting any information from the Biden administration. So we have filed a lawsuit against the Department of Homeland Security for information about crimes associated with the aliens let in under Biden's new policy. Again, a straightforward request that we can't get the time of day on from the Biden administration. This is a border crisis without precedent in American history. And so Judicial Watch is prepared to devote not only the resources we have in court now, but additional resources to uncover the truth about it. So when you have a completely open borders, it places the American people at risk, not only in terms of health, national security, their tax dollars, dare I say it, but also their personal security. And the Biden administration doesn't want you to know the truth about it, but Judicial Watch does, which is why we have filed this new lawsuit in federal court that is following on reports that 61,000 immigrants who illegally crossed the Mexican border have been released in the United States since Biden took office under this program alone. I urge you to call your senators. The phone number is 202-225-3121. They are still pursuing this impeachment charade against President Trump. He's out of office. Now, I know there's a debate whether you can impeach someone or at least conduct a trial of him, impeach and or conduct a trial after someone leaves office. I think it's an open question. My guess is the Senate can do what it wants to do. Certainly there's precedent. It's not strong precedent, but there's precedent. And I think the Constitution is vaguer than those who oppose a trial of President Trump would like to admit. But it's, to me, it's an open question in the least. But that's not the point here, really. Is there any credible basis to impeach the president? There was none. It was done in a summary
lawless fashion that the president had no rights under law to contest. They wouldn't let him make a presentation or call witnesses. There were no hearings, no defense. It was summary. So all of his civil rights were rolled over. And so they're going to do that with the trial. Now the trial can be handled in one or two. The trial once evidently is going to begin next week, more or less. I don't know how the schedule will go, but the articles will be sent over to the Senate next week, and it's going to happen. And if I were in the Senate, I would object to any Senate trial taking place. If it were a judicial trial, I'm not a lawyer, but typically there are opportunities in a trial to cut it short. Let's say you have a preliminary hearing, say there's nothing here, you can't go forward, more or less, right? That's what the Senate should be doing. Because to allow this to proceed and allow him to go on trial puts all of us potentially on the hot seat in terms of having our speech criminalized. Because the president said nothing that was inciting. There was no incitement under law, and there was no incitement morally. Now, I understand it's not a legal process per se. It's a constitutional political process. But if he is removed, or not, he can't be removed. If they found him guilty, that would be devastating to the First Amendment, because it would be a green light to attack and remove others who engage in core political speech that all of a sudden would be criminalized if the left doesn't like it, and to attack citizens who engage in core political speech protected, again, by the First Amendment, recognized by the First Amendment. Remember, these rights we have, they don't come from the Constitution. They're recognized in the Constitution. They come from God. So they want to overturn your God-given rights. And this impeachment attack on President Trump is part of it. So I encourage you to call your senators to let them know what you think at 202-225-3121. So as I said, we've got the lawsuits at the ready, the FOIA is at the ready. We are ready for the Biden administration. We're ready to go to court. We're ready to hold them accountable. We're ready to educate the American people. And so it's going to be a busy year for us. First up is the new documents that we have from the National Institutes of Health. We represented and are actually representing the Daily Caller News Foundation, which had asked for documents tied to China, emails mostly, for Dr. Fauci and his top deputy, Dr. Lane, Cliff Lane. And we had received documents last year, I had publicly disclosed them, detailing how in the early days of the COVID crisis, Dr. Fauci responded to an approved, let me take a step back. There was this entity, it's a WHO related entity, and they were putting out material, and they went out of their way in the email traffic saying, we've got to especially praise China's efforts. And Fauci agreed to that press release. They wanted to focus on all the countries. Let me see if I have the specific language from that older press release. This is the latest. The email showing pushing for a press release approved by Dr. Fauci, especially supporting China's COVID-19 response. Now, my guess is you haven't heard about that email and that issue from the big media or big tech. You've heard about it from Judicial Watch and obviously our friends at Daily Caller News Foundation, who's our client here. So what they've been doing is they've been slow rolling the release of documents. So we've been getting the documents, and there's another batch we've reviewed, and we're going to be releasing officially on Monday, but I'll talk to you about it today. And these are documents, I think they're Fauci's on some of the emails in the larger group of documents, but the specific emails I'm talking about mostly deal with his deputy over there, at NIH, Dr. Lane. Again, the lawsuit was filed for communications between Dr. Fauci and Deputy Director Lane and World Health Organization officials concerning the novel coronavirus. Communications of Dr. Fauci and Deputy Director Lane concerning WHO official Bruce Alward, WHO Director General Tedros, I can't read this here, I got to get my glasses, Adhanom, and China. So basically, what our friends at Daily Caller asked for were give us documents about China, COVID, and what was going on early on at NIH about COVID. And as I said, we've been getting the stonewall and the runaround. The fact is we had to sue for the documents. So Dr. Fauci, we're being told, has to review and approve all of his emails before they're released, which is rather unusual given our experience in FOIA. I'm not aware previously of that being the case in any other FOIA litigation. I could be wrong. I mean, any other FOIA litigation that we've been involved in. But I don't remember anything that happened. And we filed hundreds of Freedom of Information Act requests. So my memory isn't perfect as I get older. But I've been doing this for 22, 23 years. And I'm not aware of a senior official personally approving, at least admittedly, personally approving the release of his own or her own emails. I'm not, but Fauci, he gets special treatment, it seems. So going back to what the subset of documents show with his deputy, Mr. Lane or Dr. Lane, they show that there was this accommodation given to China on confidentiality and other communication control. There was a confidentiality form that they had previously used, and the emails indicate that they needed to be changed, and they were changed. And this is the phrase they use. The forms this time are tailored to China's terms, so we cannot use the ones from before. Tailored to China's terms. I'm not sure what those terms were, but do you think they're good? Do you think they're on the side of transparency or otherwise accountability? I doubt it. Another WHO briefing package was sent to NIH officials traveling to China as part of the COVID-19 response. And it asked that the officials not share information until they have agreement with China. Important. It's all in caps. Please treat this as a sensitive and not for public communication until we have agreed communications with China. So China seemed to be given some sort of veto power, the way I read this email, over communications concerning COVID. This is why WHO, this is why President Trump pulled the United States of America from WHO, because it was acting as a front for China as opposed to an independent agency that would neutrally pursue public health measures. Now, I was thinking about this today. Whenever you hear the phrase public health or public health experts, kind of check to make sure your wallet's still there. Because I translate that to political. So every time you hear public health, just remember, political. These are political officials, political appointees. They say they're career civil servants, but as you see with Dr. Fauci, he is as political as any United States senator or congressman or president. And arguably, he's given more influence and power than our own elected officials, even though he's appointed. So that's what was going on. And we've exposed it through a lawsuit. It was not exposed by Congress. It was not voluntarily disgorged to our clients, the Daily Caller News Foundation, by NIH. We had to sue for the basic information about what was going on with China and such, and WHO on a public health, I use that phrase again, issue that shut down the entire world. So once again, it's Judicial Watch that comes in to get information that you would think everyone in the country, in the media establishment, and the political class would want access to. Nope. Nope. I mean, it really does highlight the corruption of the media, doesn't it? And the corruption of the oversight body that Congress is supposed to be. They have little to zero interest, the community structure in Congress, in conducting real oversight. The media is just about, in many ways, it's not saying they don't do journalism here and again and don't do something useful in terms of highlighting government misconduct and abuse and just telling us what the government's up to. But kind of the energy is directed towards advancing ideological narratives and, more dangerously, suppressing opponents. So anything that undermines the credibility of the government agencies that now that Dr. Fauci is the head of, he's been head of it for some time, at least this particular aspect of the NIH, they don't want to cover, they don't want to pursue, they don't want to ask any questions about. And this is why Judicial Watch's work is so important. The Daily Caller News Foundation is the exception that proves the rule. They're asking for questions because they're serious journalists here. Judicial Watch, in my view, does more serious journalism in terms of exposing and educating Americans about what the government's up to than the New York Times, the Washington Post, and all the big media combined, especially on the issues of government corruption. So what else did we find? And there was also a strategic study, there was a study, I wouldn't call it a study, they called it an epi-analysis, which I took to mean epidemiological analysis of COVID. And how did they want to handle that? They wanted to handle that is, it shall not be further disseminated. So there was a secret analysis that was done that we don't know much about beyond what the email says. So it was marked by these emails show secrecy and accommodations to China. And as I said already, there was a press release that went out of its way in terms of describing the response to coronavirus, went out of its way specifically with the Fauci's approval, and this is the previous documents we've uncovered, to praise China. And as I said in my comment, these new emails show that WHO and Fauci's NIH had special accommodations to the Chinese communists' efforts to control information about COVID. I mean, the emails are going to be out, and they're going to be out on Monday. You can look at them when they come out, and you can draw your own conclusions. But that's my analysis of it. I mean, COVID is, we could have an entire Judicial Watch, there's enough for Judicial Watch to do nothing but COVID investigations in terms of the disruption to our economy, the destruction of our of jobs, the undermining of our liberties, the misconduct and abuse and suppressing information related to COVID. As I said before, and it bears repeating because it's outrageous, I am still locked out of Twitter over an innocuous tweet I made about hydroxychloroquine. Completely innocuous, and one that had specifically the language I sometimes repeat tweets because I recognize that people don't see the tweets initially, so I repeat them so more people see them. And the language I had used repeatedly had specifically been complained about before by Twitter. And Twitter found that the language was not in violation of its terms of service. But all of a sudden, they told me I needed to take it down. And even if I did, I'd be locked out for 7 days. So I appealed it. And it's now 6 weeks later. They haven't done jack on it. So the tweet was accurate. It was true. It didn't even mention COVID. It didn't mention COVID. Didn't mention COVID. But what is the science behind the masks? What is the science behind social distancing? What is the science behind mass lockdowns of people who are seemingly healthy? There is no science behind it in the terms of credible science that's been tested, as Fauci would have us test emerging treatments, meaning you have a randomized controlled control study, the gold standard, right? You got a group X, you got group Y. X has the placebo, Y has the intervention, and you figure out if it works. There's no science behind any of the interventions, as best I can tell in that regard. There's some observational studies which we're told don't work for certain treatments, but do work for masks. What's, for instance, the basis for 6 feet separation? I'm asking. Tell me, why not 5 feet? Why not 12 feet? Shouldn't it be long? Should be more? And more importantly, what is the basis for mass lockdowns that have never been used in world history? Never before used to control the spread of anything. I mean, there have been restrictions on public events, I guess, during the 1918 epidemic, but modest and short term. I mean, Fauci is now saying, initially said that you shouldn't wear masks. Then he said you should wear masks. And he said, even if you're vaccinated, we'll have to be wearing masks, even if the country, I shouldn't say even if you are. Well, I think he has said, even if you are vaccinated, you should still be careful about your activities, meaning restrict your public activities. So when I say political, I mean political. I mean, the good news is we have some of these vaccines that it combined with the fact that people are getting increased natural immunity to COVID and top of the vaccines, we should be in a position where even the lockdown fanatics won't be able to persuade anyone that continued lockdowns are appropriate. Our children are being locked out of their schools. That's what I'm concerned about. Who's standing in the schoolhouse door against our children? They can't get in to do what kids want to be able to do and what the parents want them to be able to do, which is to learn and not be traumatized. So we got a bunch of Freedom of Information Act requests on this. We're getting more documents that as we speak. So stay tuned for more there.
We have new documents, and they're better than documents. They're actual audio-visual recordings of the police investigation of the death of Ashli Babbitt. Included in the materials is a cell phone video that I think is new of the Ashli Babbitt shooting. We have audios of the witness interviews, including that of Lieutenant Byrd, who refused to talk to investigators, as best we can tell. And plus we have photos of Lieutenant Byrd, who was the shooter of Ashli Babbitt. There's a headshot photo, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So how did we get here? Well, Judicial Watch, despite everyone supposedly being interested in January 6th, Judicial Watch is actually conducting an independent, thorough investigation of what went on. How did it happen? And what about the people who died? We sued, for instance, for the autopsy results of Officer Sicknick, who everyone, the big media and the left lied about the circumstances of his death. And it looked like the medical examiner here in DC sat on the truth about his death, which is it wasn't a homicide. And that material was only released after we sued. And we also sued about records about the shooting death of Ashli Babbitt. Here we have a police officer involved shooting of an unarmed woman, 14-year veteran, who was no immediate threat to anyone, and silence, crickets. The Justice Department refused to do anything. The Capitol Police Department, who is run by the politicians on the Hill, namely Nancy Pelosi, refused to do anything and gave him a free pass. And in fact, his name was kept secret from the American people for months until he voluntarily came forward to talk about this and try to defend his decision to shoot and kill Ashli Babbitt. And so Judicial Watch had a lawsuit against the DC Police Department and the Office of Medical Examiner for records. And you may recall a few weeks ago, we received records from the police investigation after months of litigation from the DC police. And they include witness interviews that make it pretty clear, because the officers were right near Lieutenant Byrd, that Ashli Babbitt was not armed. No one saw any arms in her hands. So there was no mistake. Oh, I thought she had a weapon. Oh no, she didn't have a weapon. Now they did find a knife in her pocket after she died, but that didn't have any impact on Lieutenant Byrd's decision to shoot her. She was coming through that window. You've all seen the video that's generally been out there, I'm sure, and presented no imminent threat. And Byrd wasn't there alone. In fact, there were police officers on the other side of the window who just could have pulled her away. Yet he shot and killed her. And as the record showed, there was no good reason. And to further confirm that, how reckless and dangerous was the decision by Lieutenant Byrd to shoot and kill Ashli Babbitt, you have to remember, as I said, there were not only other citizens on the other side of the glass doors, but also police officers, fellow police officers. And the new cell phone video that we have, it's heavily pixelated because the DC police they told us were trying to protect the identity of the police, or individuals who didn't volunteer to have their identities released by the government. It's heavily pixelated, you'll see. And it shows, so imagine this is Ashli Babbitt coming through, and Byrd's back here, shoots her, right? And down here are a bunch of stairs, and the stairs, the police are coming up. There's a squad, heavily armed police officers, it looks like, coming up. And they hear the shot, and they all stop. And it's pretty clear that if the bullet had gone wrong, they could have hit, Lieutenant Byrd could have hit a police officer. So right here for you now is the new cell phone video showing those police officers who were placed at harm's way as a result of Lieutenant Byrd's reckless decision to shoot Ashli Babbitt. So here's the video. Watch it through its entirety, and you'll see why it's important.
We back you guys. This said you say this one. You go ahead. Watch the fuzzy mad You guys, back off! Go.
So there you have it. You see in that video why Lieutenant Byrd's decision to shoot Ashli Babbitt was so reckless and dangerous, because not only were there civilians there, but there were other law enforcement personnel who were, practically speaking, right in the line of fire. Now, my view is Lieutenant Byrd's shooting was treated quite differently than other police officer-involved shootings. And of course, I don't need to tell you that. You already know that. If it weren't a Trump supporter, if it weren't January 6th, if this weren't the Capitol Hill Police, which is the police agency right now run by Nancy Pelosi and her Democratic colleagues on the Hill, I'm convinced Lieutenant Byrd, in the least, would have faced a more serious criminal investigation. And also, again, in the least, an administrative sanction for recklessly shooting this unarmed individual. It was a bad shooting. And that video we have, which it took us forever and a day to get, further demonstrated. Also, we received, and it looked like it was a criminal investigation. One of the curious things, and I say this not knowing how it was resolved, because the Justice Department, which we're also suing for records about their decision related to the prosecution of Lieutenant Byrd, or non-prosecution in his case, hasn't given us the documents. But it's unclear from the documents we received whether there was a criminal prosecution recommended and rejected. So we don't know for sure whether someone wanted to prosecute him or not within the police department or within the Justice Department, or how that worked. But the pictures we have demonstrate that it looked to me that he was being seriously investigated, at least in part. Here, there's a picture of him. You can see, they got a straight-on headshot of Lieutenant Byrd. It's not quite a mugshot, but it's pretty darn close. And then they have, which I thought was even more interesting, pictures of his hands. So I defer to the forensic experts among you to tell us why, in your comments, why that's important. And then, of course, there are pictures of the gun. Many pictures of the gun were produced to us as well. And you'll see those pictures they're running through now. So this is stuff exclusively obtained by Judicial Watch. So you have all of Congress investigating January 6th. We have that Star Chamber proceeding, that abusive investigation of Nancy Pelosi. And they're talking about how terrible January 6th was. Why is the Judicial Watch is releasing this information and not Congress? Or why isn't it being voluntarily disgorged in the ordinary course, as would ordinarily happen if it were another police officer involved in shooting? It's politics, plain and simple. And some of the other photos we have include photos of the crime scene generally. And they're going to run a few photos as I'm talking here. You can kind of see the doorway where Babbitt went through. Well, she didn't get through because they shot her. Remember, you had that crowd behind that door, and I'm sure it was scary for everyone involved. If you're on the wrong side of that door, you see a crowd and you don't know what's going to happen. But we pay these police officers to keep their heads about them and not panic and not shoot. And that's the most charitable way of putting it. Prosecutors might put it a different way. And so you see from the photos how the crazy situation there, at least with respect to that specific door area. And so we also have, I don't know if they'll be up in time for this video, but we have a few dozen of the audio witness statements, or the witness statements, audio recordings of the witness statements saying they didn't see any, that Babbitt was unarmed, and other information that show. And you can listen to it all. You can look at because we have the written materials as well from our last release of materials. And now we've got the audio witness statements, which are very interesting to hear because this material provides dramatic firsthand information about the shooting death of Ashli Babbitt. And included in these audio witness statements is the audio statement of Lieutenant Byrd, who, as best we can tell, refused to cooperate, which is his right. But here is the 2-minute or so audio interview of Lieutenant Byrd. The voices sound weird because, and they sound weird in all of the witness statements, audio at least, is because the government somehow wanted to disguise the voices of people, even though in the case of Lieutenant Byrd, he's identified. So here is the audio interview. Here's the audio of the interview of Lieutenant Byrd.
Today is January 6th, 2020. It is approximately 1938 hours. I am in Internal Affairs Division. We are located at 119 D Street, U.S. Capitol Police Headquarters. present is the target of the criminal investigation for the Oscar Ball shooting. Sir, would you please introduce yourself?
Lieutenant Michael Byrd, United States Capitol Police, House Chamber Section, Capitol Division, PIN number.
Thank you very much for that, sir. And if you would please introduce, also present, if you would please introduce yourself.
Agent MPD IAD,
And also present.
Special Agent United States Capitol Police Criminal Investigations Section.
Thank you very much. Now, before we get into the interview itself, I want to advise you of what's called the Garrity warnings. What Garrity says is that you are not required to give a statement to us today, that if you choose to do so or not choose to do so will have no bearing on your employment, that any statement you give is voluntary, but also please be aware that any statement that you give will be shared with the United States Attorney's Office. Any statement you give will be shared with the United States Attorney's Office. Okay. Do you understand the Garrity warning?
I do.
Okay. Are you willing to give us a statement today?
I would prefer to have a lawyer present
Okay.
under those, under the information that you just provided.
That is perfectly understandable. And I will not ask you to provide a statement today. I will ask you, though, that when you do secure counsel, you have my business card, my contact information on them. If you would have them reach out to me to arrange for you to provide a statement when appropriate.
Yes, sir.
Okay? All right, then. Well, then, with that said, we're going to end the recording at this time, unless there's anything else anyone would like to add. Okay. Then I'm going to end the recording at this time. It is approximately 1941 hours.
So you see, Lieutenant Byrd didn't want to talk. He wanted to have his lawyer, and as best we can tell, no one ever interviewed him, at least in the police department of the Metropolitan Police Department, about his decision to shoot Ashli Babbitt. Of course, he talked to the media about it, but he didn't talk to law enforcement. Isn't that interesting? So this is, it shows you how important Judicial Watch's work is, that we're able to get this information in the face of a Congress that's focused on trying to destroy its political enemies using the pretext of January 6th. And of course, this is not our only lawsuit. As I said, we sued the Justice Department for its information on the shooting death of Ashli Babbitt, the only person killed via homicide that day. And we've sued the Congress for the videos. They're telling the court in our case against them for the videos, 14,000 hours of videos from that day. Not 1 second of the January 6th videos that Congress has can be released to Judicial Watch under the Open Records Law. In fact, they're saying they're not even public records. And if they were, they're not important enough to release. The public interest doesn't outweigh their interest in confidentiality. Well, which is it? The worst day in American history that the public has an interest in figuring out how it happened? Or some just regular congressional day that doesn't require them to start releasing videos of what went on? You know where we stand on it. But Pelosi is the enemy, as I said before, of transparency on this. We have also litigation about the government's abuse of power in terms of targeting innocent Americans, trying to get the financial transaction records of everyone here in D.C. We have that lawsuit against the FBI. We got the military using January 6th as a pretext to start monitoring the social media posts, it looks like, in an inappropriate way of our enlisted officials, our enlisted men and women, and who knows who else. Postal Service doing the same thing, monitoring social media posts. Who knew? We have a lawsuit on that. We have a lawsuit on Nancy Pelosi's conversation with General Milley about in their effort to undermine President Trump in the days shortly before the inauguration, trying to undermine the chain of command. Lawsuit after lawsuit. This is the real heavy lifting that's necessary on January 6th.